Roy.
Night Watchman, how you doing, buddy?
I'm well. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Night Watchman, some real, I would say, unfortunate stuff happening in the Middle East, man. Like, whoa, man. So I gotta send out prayer and a good vibes for what? Peace. Can you say peace, man?
Peace, important thing. Yeah,
absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, Night Watchman, one of the
things. We're not going to say anything controversial, right?
No. If it does, I know it's coming from you.
No, nope. Not going to do
it. All right, there you go. So having said that, Night Watchman, you know what? One of the things, though, and we definitely have to give some major props to artists, because artists a lot of times reflect what's going on in society, reflect the times.
They reflect, they express how we think and how we feel. I don't know where we would be without artists, because sometimes artists are the only ones that can put it into a context that we can immediately connect to.
Absolutely. So you know what? Right now we have maybe two artists on deck. I think we should bring them out. What do you think, man?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, the first artist, and like I said, both of them, I'm going to let them kind of like tell their story and their journey. One of them is someone who I recently met, was actually put in touch with me by my man Wayne Charles, and that could only be Bayeté Ross Smith. Bring him up here. Yes. Right. What's up, my brother? How you doing, man?
Welcome.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And now watch, we're giving him props. Why? We're giving him props, not only being the inaugural artist in residence, that's one, but the other, he's from Harlem, baby. Harlem.
That's right.
In the house. Okay, so that's one.
Well, the next disclosure, I'm technically from the Upper West Side, but I've lived in Harlem for the past 15 years.
No. You've been here long enough that we say you're from Harlem. Okay. You're close enough. just like we say Curtis is from Harlem, even though he was originally from the
BX, baby. BX, not Wakanda, the BX. So needless to say, you know what? This other artist, we actually allowed him to cross the border occasionally to come up to Harlem. And he's from the People's Republic of Brooklyn. And that can only be Dr. Lorenzo Pace. Bring him up here.
In the house.
In the house, yes. Dr. Pace. All right. And you notice that
he's got the Harlem cap on too.
You know that.
We're all representing,
Exactly.
Because Harlem is a state of mind more than just a place.
Not a geographic destination. You got that right, Bob. So let's start this off. But Bayeté, please, you got to tell us about the journey and also the inaugural artist in residence at Columbia University's law school. Do tell.
Yes. It was quite an honor to be appointed in that position. So a few years ago, this was part of an ongoing process, I think, with the university and with the law school. They started thinking about how the artwork that they have in the law school buildings impacted the way the students thought and analyzed issues related to law, but then also how they felt about one another and the community there. And what they started looking at was that they didn't have a wide variety of different types of artworks, and a lot of what they had were portraits of notable people from the law school, but they noticed that those notable people fit one demographic. So essentially it was a bunch of portraits of old white men. And there's become more of an understanding of the fact that the reason why a lot of those people were in positions to make certain societal contributions was at the expense of other people's opportunity. And without delving too deeply into the history and the politics of all that, they wanted to find a way to address that in an effective and efficient way with visual art. And so they decided to move a lot of those images to less prominent positions, and they started strategizing about what that would be replaced with. And then it occurred to them that if they had an artist present, that they could start to fill the space with a wider variety of different types of artwork and more contemporary artworks. And at the time, I had been developing a program that I've been incubating for several years called The Art of Justice, which utilizes my work as a visual artist, as well as a series of programs, educational programs, and just general programming that is based on different art projects that I've created. And the idea is to get people who go into legal professions, which are often policy-making professions and professions that run our criminal justice system, utilizing the art to get them to question their pre-existing beliefs, question how they frame and perceive the law, and hopefully make them more productive, social servants and, people who serve the community and serve the country. So when I heard they were looking to have an artist in residence, I submitted some materials that I've been working on, and I was selected for an appointment a couple of years ago. They actually extended my appointment because they were excited about the possibilities of what we could do together. And it was a very, very fulfilling and dynamic experience that I think had a really productive impact on the law school.
Beautiful. Hey, Night Watchman, I mean, can you say the concept of equity in law?
Hey, you could be impacting generations to come.
No doubt. So you know what? I guess Dr. Pace, welcome to Harlem, baby. Doing the thing, and I understand that you also have a celebration happening on I believe it's October 22nd. Is that it?
Yes, and you're the MC.
I am. Woo! So do tell me the genesis of that particular work of art there in Foley Square. Thank you, Dr. Pace. So do tell now.
Before I open my mouth, I always try to give homage to my ancestors.
Yes.
And this is me connecting myself with our ancestors with music. And so we're looking at something that deals with the very foundation of the history of New York City. And in that process, it has been a challenging experience for the city, as well as for the artists to engage in such a challenging subject, which is slavery. Slavery is a very challenging topic for all of us. Real challenging topic that nobody want to talk about. Nobody want to talk about it because it could bring up, it's like a sore on your hand or on your back or something, and you moving it around, you touch it, and it starts bleeding all over again. And so the idea of dealing with such a challenging topic, that's what the basic of the Foley Square Monument is all about. We got to talk about it. As painful and as difficult as it is, we have to talk about it. And so the celebration on the 22nd from 11 a.m. to 2 is to celebrate my 10-year struggle to build this monument. This monument is over 5 stories high, weighing over 300 tons. And it celebrates the founding of this country on our backs. And we are the builders of this city. And that's something that we haven't been acknowledged about. And that's something we need to acknowledge. could go on for hours talking about this subject because it deals with the very foundation of who we are as Black people.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you conceived the project and just the impetus where it started and a little bit about the journey to where it is now?
In 1991, I went to the South to bury my father. And I came back to the city. They had discovered the African burial ground. And so everybody was shocked because this is the oldest burial ground in the country. They have not found any remains as of now that's older than one here in New York City. And so when I got back and I saw the big article in the New York Times that says they discovered this 1800 century burial ground. I said, what? So I went immediately to the site. They had it all fenced off. I jumped over the fence and began to take pictures. And I was like, wow. And that whole experience became a national, real coalesce around Black people saying, hey, we told you we built this city. And so this is the remains of these ancestors. They kept digging in the foundation. They was building an office building at 290 Broadway for the city, for the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And the bone just kept coming up. Bone just kept coming up. And they just had to, hey, we got to stop this project. And Gus Shavitz, from a senator in Illinois, said, hey, you got to stop. And they were forced to stop digging. And they continued after that, and they pulled up 427 remains.
Well.
And so the city was a strong struggle. I mean, that was a real struggle because they didn't want to acknowledge it. They didn't want to, stop that project because this is a very 290 Broadway. It's a very expensive area here in the city. That's the heart of the city. So they said, okay, we have to deal with the history. We have to deal with how can we best represent the history of this site. And so they put a call out for an artist to build a monument to honor these enslaved. And so I got the call after looking at over 400 some artists. It narrowed down to 5, and I got the call. And it took me 10 years to erect this monument. I have to go to Quebec, Canada. This is made out of black-granite, the hardest stone on the planet. I have to go to Quebec, Canada, to go to the mountains and extract block by block of the granite, take it back to the foundry, and shape it with the concept that I want. But I guess to get to this point, when they first had a call for it, I gave them my design, and they said, "Oh, okay, we like this." And then after a while, they turned around and said, "No," because I had chains in Africa and boats, and they didn't want that in their right in their face. Why don't you go back and come up with another concept? I said, "I thought you liked this." He said, "Well, we know, but this is not what we want, because it's at the heart of our judicial system."
Yep.
The CIA, the FBI, the mayor's office right in the next block. The entire city administration is across the street. U.S. Supreme Court is across the street. This is the most iconic site in this city. And so they said, go back and come up with another concept. The community have changed. And so I said, okay. So I go back and did this whole drawing. They said, this is I said, you said you wanted something different, you know. So I came out, laid my whole thing out. They said, no, that's not what we want. I said, what do y'all want? They said,
Mm.
we don't know what we want, but we know it when we see it. But this is not. I said, okay. So I said, what do these white folks want? So I go to the Metropolitan. And I said, I went to the Ocean and African section to get some inspiration on how to be inspired to honor our ancestors. So there, I stayed there the whole day trying to get inspiration, trying to get concept. So I fumbled upon the Chihuahua. The Chihuahua is a male and female antelope from Mali, West Africa.
Yeah.
And I said, no, a lot of the African countries acknowledge this icon, Chihuahua. I said, oh, let me see if I can come up with it. I knew I couldn't try to copy the image directly. I said, well, come on, you're a contemporary artist. Come on with a unique design. So I went back to my studio and began to design the monument. And I worked on that thing for, oh man, just to get it where it's presentable to the committee. I brought it back in and gave them my concept, a model. And they said, this is what we want. I said, wow.
Yeah. That, as you said, Lorenzo, that was the journey. That's what got you there. And speaking of which, because remember, we were talking about justice. We're talking about the building, the foundational building of this country, New York, no doubt about it, for sure. So I'm thinking too, Bayeté, literally with you walking into those halls of the Columbia Law School, seeing no images that really, really reflected the diversity of this country, much less this city. I mean, what were some of the thoughts, the inspirations that touched you, man?
So my goal in my presence in Columbia Law School was really to affect the education process for people getting legal education, as well as make an impression on the faculty and administrators about how they framed how law was taught and how people considered their cultural perspectives in terms of how they perceived and translated the information that they are receiving. A lot of my work is really about creating experiences where people are forced to question their pre-existing beliefs through engaging art experiences. And so I knew that it was important for people to reflect more deeply on how they process and interpret certain types of information and how their identity and their cultural perspective filters that. And so when I went in there, there was, of course, the issue of representation, but then there was also the issue of how do we place a broader representation into this space in a way that gets people to be thoughtful about their role as practitioners of our legal system and also as policymakers, because I was very aware that a lot of people with legal education go into policymaking professions, even if they don't become practicing lawyers. They will often become politicians or they will work in systems that create policy and support our political process. So I wanted to place a wide range of different imagery in there that got people to think about the various challenges that we face as a society and the various ways in which we can improve our society. So I'll give you a few examples. One of the first shows we did there was a show called Visualizing Violence. And what I was really interested in with that exhibition is questioning our notions of violence and who we perceive as a threat, who we perceive as a victim. When do we think violence is necessary, even if unfortunate, but perhaps is necessary? When is violence even recreational, right? So like as Americans, we tend to love boxing. We love MMA and fighting sports. We love American football. That's violence, but we feel like we've placed it in an acceptable, controlled way of existing. So we kind of approve of that. Well, where are all these lines drawn? And then most importantly, and this is a very this is a thing that's very prominent in Western civilization. How does the identity of the people involved in violence affect our perception of that violence? And this is right after the Ahmaud Arbery verdict. It was right after Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted, and it was right when they announced, I believe, for the first time, that the parents of a school shooter, this was in Michigan, were going to be charged. So what I did there was I wanted to examine our history and look at our societal attitudes towards violence by looking at history and visual memory. So without going on too much of a digression, back in 2021, I published a series of short immersive films about race riots in the United States during the World War I era. It was a series called Red Summers VR. And what I did with that series was I went to the sites of different incidents, what we called race riots at the time, but really these were acts of domestic terrorism. From the East St. Louis race riot in 1917 to several acts of domestic terrorism during the Red Summer of 1919. And we finished off with Tulsa in 1921.
Wow.
So I created these films and I published them with The Guardian, but I also created versions of these that could exist as art installations. So for the Visualizing Violence show, we installed these films into the hallways and spaces of the law school. And then I also installed a series of targets that I created where I took photos of regular people kind of on a studio background. These are people I know, and a couple of them were actually photos of myself. And I took them to firing ranges and shot them with different firearms at firing ranges. And then I framed them with a gunmetal frame and placed bullet casings around the perimeter. So you see these different targets, and then you also experience these short narrative films that discuss some of the most violent times in American history, and also very violent times in American history that a lot of people aren't aware of. And by extension, the violence of the Red Summer of 1919, the violence of Tulsa in 1921, the violence of the East St. Louis riot in 1917 affected policy and affected law, and also affected the trajectory of our society leading into the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. So that was how I tied all of that in to law and what the students and faculty and administrators would be discussing on a daily basis, while also creating a visual impact that was engaging, very, very, very rich in storytelling and very visually dynamic, and doing all this to get them to really reflect more deeply on the issues of violence, how it exists in our society, and how that relates to policy and law and everything that they're learning.
Oh boy. Night Watchman, man. I'm just thinking about and what you just highlighted. A lot of folks didn't even know about the Tulsa race massacre, okay? Until they maybe saw a Watchmen, on HBO.
I have a funny story about that, Curtis. So, as we've discussed before, I'm a proud FAMU Rattler, went to Florida A&M University, it's a historically Black college. A lot of our alumni are very proud of our school. The way that I learned about Tulsa, and this comes back to like how the identity of people involved in violence affects our perceptions of it as a society. I learned about Tulsa after the Oklahoma City bombing. When that happened, I was college. I'm dating myself a bit there, but I was in college. And so a lot of the news reporting and journalistic reporting were like talking about like, oh, this is an act of domestic terrorism. This is the worst act of domestic terrorism in the United States. And all my elders, all the professors, all the elders I was around at FAMU were like, nope.
Slow down.
They're like, actually, in the same state, back in 1921, there was this even more horrific act of domestic terrorism, but it doesn't get talked about because of who the majority of the people were who died and were attacked. And that's how I learned about Tulsa. So it almost takes us full circle when we're talking about this idea of when is violence condoned, when is it acceptable, when is it deplorable, who's a threat, who's a victim, and how the identity of all the players in that affect our perceptions of it as a society and affect how it is discussed in the annals of history, so to speak.
Wow. Now, Watchman, I see you. Go ahead. You're chomping right there.
Yeah, just it speaks to the whole thread right there speaks to the power of art. You mentioned The Watchmen, and I believe that Watchmen series, which is not the original film or the comic book that it was founded on, but the more recent HBO series featuring Regina King. And I believe that their depiction of the Tulsa incident was the first depiction that I've seen in mainstream media. And but what's also important is that the showrunner for that series was inspired by Ta-Nehisi Coates' book on reparations. So there's a thread where someone picks up an idea, places it in a form of art that has, wide range of reaching people. And all of a sudden there are people all over the country who's like, how did I never learn this in school in history? So, I think it just ties back so much to the work that Bayeté and Dr. Lorenzo Pace are doing in terms of creating works of art that force you to engage with those things that they want to keep in the closet. They want to keep it buried. And I feel like the whole issue around the burial ground is like a metaphor for Black history in America, how it's been buried, and we have to unearth it to allow it to have its power to be recognized and influenced, so that we can get to a place where we actually deal with these things.
Yes, indeed. And Dr. Pace, you have to also tell me about the lock that was passed on to you and the significance there about that.
Well, I just want to say, Brother Bayeté, I mean, I would like to collaborate with you, brother. On some kind of way, and I think that's very important because you have inspired me, man. That's what art is supposed to do, inspire each other. And so just hearing you dealing with the whole aspects of what you brought to the table for law,
yes.
bringing the whole aspect of that. But anyway,
we're doing a similar thing with dealing with the site of where things happened and creating some sense of commemoration so that we can move forward as a society. And too many people want to ignore these things because it makes them uncomfortable, but there's no progression if we don't address it.
I totally agree. And I'm glad the way you address it in a kind of like artistic way, man. That's really. But going back to Curtis, you see this little book here?
Yeah.
The Lion and the Lock. The Lion and the Lock is a little boy taken from Africa. Let me first saying how this came about. The lock. So, like I said before, I go back home. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, the cradle of the Confederacy. And I going back home to visit, to bury my pop. And after the funeral, of course, like families in the South, they all get together and hang out. It's almost like a party. We eat food, stuff like that. So my uncle, who's 2 years younger than my 2 years younger than my father, he all of a sudden turned to my mother and said, "Mary, do you have a bag in the house I had given my father 35 years ago?" And my mother jumped up out of the chair and just went to the bedroom and said, "Hey, this is what you're talking about?" He goes into the little bag and said, "Yes, this is it. This is the lock that was given to him by his father, Joseph Pace, which was given to him by his father, Steve Pace, the slave in our family." Everybody said, "What?" To stop all the food. Oh, no. Everybody came to a complete stop. And my uncle began to tell us the history of the law. And so after all that discussion, the family said, "Okay, what we're going to do with this?" And so they said, "Well, let's give it to Lorenzo." So give it to me, what am I going to do with this law? And so I just had to get this lock. The family deemed that I have to have this lock. So I bring it back to New York. And I said, "Man, what am I going to do with this lock?" So when I got back home to my studio, I threw it in the closet. I didn't want to deal with no lock, man. The history, the heavy, it was like an albatross. At the same time, I was elated to have an icon from our family that ties me directly to the enslaved population of my history.
Yes.
And so one day, my daughter, who's about 8, said, "Daddy, are we from slaves?" This question just came out of. So why are you asking me that kind of question? She said, "Well, the kids were making fun of me, of my hair, my nose, my lock, my lips, my everything." I said, "What?" And so I said, "Baby, you don't have to be ashamed of yourself." But we were taught to hate ourselves.
Yes.
And that's the crux of our issue. We have to eradicate that from our being, especially as Black people. Because that is the real reason why we have our problems with ourselves.
Yes.
It was embedded in us from day one. You were Black. You were 3/4 of a human being. You were never nothing, and you never will be nothing. Your nose too big. Your lips too big. Your hair too nappy. Everything is bad about you. And we have embraced that. And we still need to eradicate that from our spirit even to this day. So I went up in the closet, snatched that lock out, and began to write this little funky book. And this little book tells you about a little boy taken from Africa, put in locks and chains, and I'll try to make it as very simplistic as possible for kids. And then the basic of the foundation of it, the little boy with his mother told him, "Hey, not to play in the forest by himself," but he played there anyway. And one day while he was playing in the forest with his imaginary friends, a strange man came and took him away. And put him on a big boat. And locks and chains were put upon him. And he said basically everything was changed for him. His name, his clothes, his food, and even his language. Obatala, Shangu, Shangu, Shangu. But he could not forget his home.
Mm.
And
Wow.
over the years, he feel like, hey, I want to be a slave for the rest of my life.
Mm.
And one day, a tall man in a big black hat said, all slaves should be free. And freedom finally came. And we're free. We're free. We're free.
Yeah.
We're free. We're free. And Jelani was set free. But he kept the lock. He passed the lock on to his children, so he'd never forget from where you came.
Mm.
And
Wow. So, you know what? I'm thinking to myself now, knowing what the stuff that, let's say, Ron DeSantis has done in Florida, like Night Watchman, would that book even be allowed?
Oh,
no,
definitely
it's
not.
banned.
Yeah, it's been banned
It's not
already.
just banned in this book.
It's part of the banned book club there.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, congratulations, because that's how powerful we know it is.
Yeah.
I mean, that friends of mine called me up and say, Lorenzo, what an honor.
Mm, mm.
I said, what? He said, yeah, what an honor to have this book banned. Because the power of art and the power of our history is the fact that nobody want to talk about how we have really built this country.
Yeah.
And brought music, dance, science, and everything else to this country. So I just think that we still have a long way to go. And that's what this celebration is about on the 22nd. To celebrate our history, celebrate our culture, celebrate our everything we have done here in this country. But what really, I was talking to one of my friends the other day. I said, what is the symbol of America? Curtis, I'm going to ask you that question. What America is noted for around the world?
Well, the idea, the thought of democracy.
Exactly.
That's what
democracy raised to
and
what?
That's based on one man, one vote. But remember, that's still in theory, because when we were not founded on that foundation. But yes, go ahead.
But the idea of what everybody acknowledge America for is that iconic symbol of freedom.
Yes.
Because America, she had to fight for her own freedom from British. And also, France gave her the Statue of Liberty, which
Yes.
everybody wants to see the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
Which symbolizes what? Freedom.
Right.
And I want this iconic piece, Time for the Human Spirit, to represent our freedom, because we had to fight for our freedom as well.
Yes.
And in that process, if we can take that same kind of liberty that everybody goes to the Statue of Liberty, I want, especially Black people, to come to that site and acknowledge this is the largest site in the world that devoted to our enslavement. And that's the essence of it. But I also want to introduce you to other people who have fought. These are my books.
Yes. Okay.
Frederick Douglass and the North Star. This is one of my sweethearts.
Oh, Harriet. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And my grandmother's quilt. And Martin Luther King, I don't have a copy of that with me. But also I wrote a play based on that book, Jelani and the Lock, called Locked. It's a 2-hour production theater piece called Locked. And that is the real essence of our history.
Wow.
from the beginning to where we are today.
Absolutely. And you
you
know,
can see
let me see that.
a copy
Mm-hmm.
Triumph of the
Oh,
Human.
yes. Yes.
And that's where I would like for everybody to celebrate. This is our symbol of freedom. And I'm trying to rename that site from Foley Square to the African Square. Why I want to say that is because right across the street from this monument, the first African American Supreme Court justice is named after the building that Trump is being tried on right now. Thurgood Marshall, the first U.S. Supreme Court. Right next to that building is the first African American, David Dinkins from Harlem. And also, just last year, 2 years ago, they renamed that around the monument Black Lives Matter Boulevard.
Wow.
And across the street is the immigration building. All the immigrants come. And that is the central, and two buses come through there every 5 minutes. 2 buses from around the country, around the world. People come through that site constantly. So we're looking at the very foundation of our history here. And I want to thank you for giving us that opportunity to at least lay it out.
Oh,
so
yes.
It began to hopefully resonate with all of us, because that monument will be there when I'm gone and all of us is gone.
True.
I would like for that spot to be a continual spot to be celebrated, even when you're gone and everybody else is gone. And be an institutionalized spot that deals with the African experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that, what you're talking about, Dr. Pace, with in combination with, you know, some of your books being part of the ban, is that I think what we are going to have to do is really start taking these historical narratives that are undertold and aren't included in the mainstream understanding of history, and start taking those into public spaces and sharing those in public spaces where you can't necessarily ban that type of gathering and that type of dissemination of information. I think what we are going to have to do is have some sort of really intentional, organized system of bringing people into public spaces around the country to kind of share this information.
Yes. Yeah.
You guys have triggered me. I've got like all kinds of things going off in my head, but one of them is about the lock, because it reminded me that the original design of the Statue of Liberty included a lock on her foot. Because what is not talked about is that the Statue of Liberty was given from France to America to celebrate America ending slavery. It wasn't about the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It was about the fact that freedom actually finally came to America when America ended the slavery. And so that lock was part of the original design that got watered down. So, so you're bringing the lock back into public view. It resonates on a few different levels. And then I was also thinking about Bayeté and his opportunity to have an impact on people going into the law profession. And it also reminded me that in our quest for freedom, law has always been one of our early and most used tools for freedom. You remember Amistad, you know, and that whole the people who were on that ship, and they won their freedom through the law. You remember what some of the other things? Okay, so Sojourner Truth, when she first ran away, she didn't run from slavery. She actually walked from slavery. But when she walked, and she was enslaved in New York State, not in the South. And so she actually walked for a couple of miles to a home of some white people who were very abolitionists. And within a year, New York had declared its own. New York ended slavery in 1827, well before the Civil War. But one of her children had been sold into slavery down south while she was gone, and she litigated to get that child back. So, the use of the law has always been one of our weapons, and it's our way to basically bring the receipts, because the ideal of American freedom and opportunity, which is supposedly has been codified in the Constitution, but we know in so many places it has never really been realized. And when we use the law, it's our way of bringing the receipts and keeping this country accountable to the ideals that have made it prosper. So
we've always been the ones to hold this country accountable.
Yeah, exactly, and continue to do so. You see what's going on now. We have Fonnie Willis, we have Letitia James, Black women prosecutors who are
don't forget Alvin now. Come on,
don't forget Alvin Bragg. Absolutely, Black prosecutors bringing these cases. It's very, very interesting that we are once again the ones who have to show up with the receipts and ask for the manager. So
good. Good one, Night Watchman. Okay, we see you. We see you. Oh, man.
Now I know why you got a Night Watchman there now.
Oh yeah, he definitely keeps me on my toes. And you know what, Bayeté, but earlier while we were offline, you had also showed me a sculpture there, and I was wondering, was this for the 50th anniversary of hip hop or what? You showed me a boombox. Do tell me about that.
Oh yes, I have one of these here with me. This is a boombox that is made of sugar and cotton pulp.
Whoa!
And it's part of a upcoming series of sculptures that I'm making that are monuments to how Black music and art have been integral parts of our freedom struggles and our freedom journeys. And I made that this year to coincide with the 50th anniversary of hip hop. I grew up in hip hop culture, and I wouldn't claim that the culture is perfect, but it was a very, very important tool for a lot of us in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s to be able to express ourselves and feel like we had freedom of expression and find our voices, as well as connecting us to different political and social issues. I always like to remind some of the people in academic circles and in artistic circles that hip hop was talking about certain social issues decades before it was acceptable in the mainstream, like mass incarceration. I think Public Enemy, for example, did Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos back in 1988 or 87. Now we have a variety of different high-profile organizations and high-profile foundations doing work against mass incarceration, but hip hop was talking about that in the 80s. And we can name other topics too. A lot of times people act like the Stop the Violence movement in hip hop never happened either. But without going on a tangent in that regard, hip hop culture, to me and to a lot of us, is the latest manifestation of Afro-descendant culture from the Americas, and it permeates throughout the Americas as a cultural tool for us to liberate ourselves. And so I thought it would be significant with the 50th anniversary and with a lot of this pushback against teaching proper history of not just the United States, but the Americas as a total, it would be significant to create sculptures that are made out of sugar and cotton, which are two of the largest cash crops of European colonialism of the Americas.
Yep.
There's tobacco and coffee also, but sugar and cotton very, very prominent in building the intergenerational wealth of that colonization. But yet many of the people who labored in those industries, Black Americans, Africans, indigenous Americans, did not receive the intergenerational wealth created by those industries. And that is the foundation of a lot of the economics of the countries of the Americas, and where a lot of the wealth stemmed from for the colonial powers in Western Europe. So I'm looking at those cash crops. I'm looking at an iconic object like the boombox that hip hop made famous. And the boombox is also a way of sharing information and creating gathering spaces for people and having community music. And I'm creating these sculptures that will speak to hip hop turning 50. And some of us would argue you might be able to say that hip hop is the first artistic movement and cultural movement created in the Americas by freed Black people, because we would say, we've only had freedom in the United States of America since 1964 with the legislation that came out of the Great Society with LBJ. And a lot of other musical and artistic forms happened while the other countries in the Americas were still under colonialism, because you notice, a lot of those countries aren't getting their freedom till the 1950s. But so this was a way of kind of examining all of those issues through an object and through materials. And then the sculptures that I'm creating, they'll be, 9, 10, 15 feet sculptures. They'll play a soundtrack that is composed of local people's favorite freedom songs, hip hop inspired songs, historians talking about the history of the sugar and cotton industries, and then local people talking about their own journeys towards freedom and oral histories from their lives related to their personal freedom struggles. So it combines all of those different elements, in a public space to create an interactive experience where people can reflect on these ideas of freedom and liberation in a more profound and complete way, let's say.
Oh, Bayeté, for sure, you're going to have some public enemy. You got to have some.
Yeah, well, I think in the current soundtrack, and I'll send you the link to the. I'll send you a link because we created a virtual page for the project as well, and so we did the first initial installation that was temporary. That was at the Linfest Center for the Arts at.
Oh yes, absolutely, one of the new buildings. Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then, but that was a temporary installation, so that's been deinstalled. But we're going to do our next installation that'll be semi-permanent with the Apollo Theater sometime in the spring. We don't have the exact install dates yet, but it'll be sometime in the spring with the Apollo Theater. So with each site, we'll have another episode, so to speak, of this mixtape that tells this history through oral history, through historians, actual accounts, and through our music, through Afro-descendant music from the Americas. But I'll send you a link to the mixtape for the first version of it and the link to the webpage we're developing, because we want this project to be able to live in a virtual space and be accessible to people around the world, but also be invigorated through the actual site where we build these sculptures. So in that mixtape, we have we don't have Fight the Power in there, but we have Can't Trust It.
All right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're right up there. So you know what? I'm also interested in terms of Dr. Pace, this particular relationship, and I could say partnership and collaboration that you have with St. Nick Alliance. Please tell me about that.
Well, I mean, I've been in Williamsburg for so many years, and St. Nick's Alliance were doing a first celebration of Juneteenth. And I have read that paper for many years, being in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the paper and said, St. Lisa Lion is doing a celebration to honor Juneteenth in Williamsburg. I said, wow, this is unusual. So I called the director of St. Lisa Lions,
Mm-hmm.
who's been here just as long as I have in the community or more.
Mm-hmm.
I said, y'all celebrating Juneteenth? He said, yeah, man. I said, can I be a part of it? He said, yeah. Go. What do you do? I said, well, I've got some children's books that I might, He said, bring them over. Let me see. So I brought them over. He said, hey, man, I would love to have you be a part of the celebration here in Williamsburg.
Nice,
Because,
nice.
And the fact that St. Nick's was right half a block from my studio.
Wow, wow.
And they said, you do performance art? I said, yes. I said, could you do a book performance of Jelani and the Lock for us? I said, hey, man, you got me some Conga Drungabus, got me some Drummers, and man, we had a ball.
Nice.
And that's how St. Nick's and I came to know each other. They brought their entire staff over to my studio.
Mm-hmm.
They brought the entire board over to my studio.
Nice.
And they said, wow, you been here all these years and we didn't know you. I said, well, hey, man, better late than never.
That's true. That's true.
So that have developed, and they have been one of our big supporters and sponsors of this Triumph of the Human Spirit celebration this year.
Beautiful.
He said, wow. You made this monument here? I said, yeah, bro. He said, I got to go see it. And he came down, saw the monument.
Mm-hmm.
This is the executive director,
Mm-hmm.
Rochford. And I said, he said, well, can we help you celebrate this thing? I said, hey, I need that because I have very little or no support, no money. He said, we'll do everything we can to get this project up and on. And they have invited at least 15 to 20 officials from the city.
Oh, nice.
And they brought the borough president, San Antonio
Reynoso. Absolutely. Absolutely.
to the
Beautiful.
studio and said, hey, man, you got to celebrate this monument here with us.
Speaking of which, I remember last year you also had, and that she is now, of course, commissioner of DCA, Lori Cumbo. She'll be coming again this year?
Exactly.
Okay.
Lori has been one of our biggest supporters as well. Lori and I go back when she first created, when she graduated from Spelman, came back to the city, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work immediately.
Excellent.
And created this first African American museum called Makata in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And this young lady not only did that, but went on to be our commissioner for the arts.
Okay. Yes, indeed. Yes,
and
indeed.
So we have a long history working together collaboratively. And I think that's very important for artists, musicians, writers come together and use their talent to make our history, make our presence here in this city much more impactful. And if we both, and we all have that creative spirit, all those egos go out the window.
That is so true. Night Watchman, we got now a lightning round because we are running out of time.
Well, yeah, so we just heard from Lorenzo. Let's hear from some last words from Bayeté, and we'll take this home.
Yes.
Well, I think it's really important now that we utilize the storytelling power of art and media to create a scenario to create a scenario where we're engaging with information with a lot more integrity. And we're also acknowledging how the different perspectives we all have as people affect the way that we receive information. And you will notice that around the world, there's a lot of chatter about different opinions and different viewpoints. And I think what's important is for us to understand that even a perspective that we disagree with can have some value and something we can learn from it. And while that is often hard to do with words, and when we're having these conversations sometimes about very, very heated topics, that's something that art and media can express in a way that's engaging and applies to our daily lived experiences in a way that is very accessible. So I hope that we would use those tools more, and that all of us who are artists and media makers will really make the effort to be responsible and accountable with how we make the work that we make and how we examine the contemporary social and cultural landscape and political landscape around the world, because we're in very, very pivotal times now.
Excellent, excellent. So, Dr. Pace, please let us know once again.
Yeah, Curtis, what you saying?
Yeah. Now, give us once again, let the public know about the event, when it's happening, and what time again.
On October 22nd, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., we're going to have a celebration, and some of the people that's who's going to be speaking is Supreme Court Judge Deborah, also Lloyd Combo is going to be commissioner, and we're trying to get, hasn't been official yet, Mayor Adams to be our keynote speaker this year. We've been working very hard to see if we can get him.
Okay.
And also, we're having a number of drummers. We have some of the women of Calabash who will be performing. And so also Jamel Gaines, who's a creative outlet, a performer, will be performing as well with his dancers. So this just, and then after the celebration, and I hope, Curtis, you come, you and your wife, we're having a after party at the El Toro, Viva Toro in Williamsburg from 4 o'clock until 8.
Okay.
And freshmen will be served. And we're hoping that we don't have no rain this year.
Yes.
Last year we had rained out.
Yes.
And so I hope that everybody can come to the celebration. It's a celebration of us.
Absolutely.
Our humanity. Basically, it's our humanity what we're talking about. The freedom of our humanity. Black people had to struggle for their freedom. But the real crux of this whole thing, what America is so noticed for, is the idea why people want to come here is
freedom. Absolutely.
We have to really put that into our consciousness, put that in our children's ideas, that freedom is the crux of our basic foundation of this country. And we had to fight every day, even to this day, to deal with that whole notion of freedom.
Absolutely. Night Watchman, take us home.
You've been listening to Soul Lounge Primetime on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Also live streaming on YouTube and Facebook and on your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. So ask Alexa, ask Siri, ask anybody. You can find us always on Monday night. Thanks for joining us. My profound thanks to these groundbreaking artists and the work that they're doing. And please support them, check out what they're doing, and spread the word.
Hey, Night Watchman, you think they'll be invited back to the barbecue or what?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you guys.